Great, thank you, Brenda.
Mhm.
As we begin our meeting tonight, I would like to ask members of the audience who are joining us by phone or online to please keep yourselves on mute during this portion of the meeting. This meeting is a work session where the public may attend but not provide testimony. Later, during the regular session, there will be time for public comments to the Planning Commission. And our first work session item is 30 minutes for an annual legal training with Christina Kratz. Over to you, Christina.
Thank you, Chair. I am going to attempt to share this presentation on the screen. Can you see that? Okay, this is the same presentation that's in your packet, and so you can go back and reference that later if you'd like as well. So again, this is your annual legal training provided by City Attorney's Office. We'll cover public meetings, public records as well, and then some land use hearing process requirements. And please feel free to jump in at any point if you have questions. So this doesn't need to be a formal thing. I have adjusted my screen so I should be able to see everyone. So if you just want to turn on your camera if you have a question, or unmute yourself and just jump in with whatever you want to ask, that would be just fine with me. So the purpose of this training is primarily for the Planning Commission, but I know that the Planning Commission has been interested in helping the public understand how it can engage with the commission and with city processes more effectively as well. And so the secondary purpose of this training is also for the public, and this is being recorded and will be available on the city's YouTube channel for Planning Commission meetings, like other work sessions are. And so I'm hoping that this can be a resource for members of the public who might want some information about how Planning Commission decisions are made generally. I hope that after this training, you better understand how to effectively participate in public meetings, that you will understand how to comply with Oregon legal requirements for land use decisions and the requirements of public records and public meetings laws that apply to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is established by Springfield Municipal Code, and the bylaws are essentially what is adopted into the code at this time. The commission's formed by 7 members. No more than 2 can be in the same kind of business or profession, and that's a requirement of Oregon state law. You serve 4-year terms. The council operating policies impose a 2-term limit, but the council can override that by majority vote, although they have indicated that they like to give opportunity to multiple citizens to participate, and so they haven't been overriding those term limits. Your regular meetings per code must be at least once a month. And they're typically held on Tuesdays, as you know. There can be special meetings that occur outside of regular meetings. In modern times, regular meetings have been twice a month, as you know, but we can cancel meetings when there are no agenda items. And then the scope of your authority is also set by the code. You make recommendations to the city council on legislative planning decisions, and we'll go through that distinction later. And then also on quasi-judicial review of permits, you act as a decision maker. And then the Planning Commission also acts as the committee for citizen involvement per the city's acknowledged citizen involvement program under statewide planning goal 1. And you also have a CCI meeting as well tonight in your role as that committee. So we're going to cover some meetings and procedures items next. So meetings overview, as with tonight, a quorum is required to meet, which is 50% of the currently appointed members plus 1. So currently there are, when the commission is fully assembled like it is now, there are 7 members. So a quorum is 4. But if a member were to resign or their term lapsed and no one was reappointed, and say there were only 5 appointed members, then a quorum would be only 3. So it is not always 4 commissioners when the commission isn't fully appointed. Your meetings follow a set agenda. The order of business is set in advance by city staff. The public hearing process within your agenda is set by the development code, but you can change the order of your agenda or hearings procedures by a motion and vote of the commission. And you have pretty broad latitude to change those procedures as long as they don't result in prejudice to any participant or citizen's rights to participate in a process. And someone from City Attorney's Office always attends your meeting. So if you have questions about that, we can always answer. And then under the Oregon Public Meetings Law, minutes are required to be kept of every meeting. The purpose of minutes is to identify essentially what happened with any action item in front of the Planning Commission. State law requires that all votes be recorded by name and that the meetings include the description of the substance of any discussion, but it does not require a precise detail or transcription of comments. So sometimes it can be helpful not to include all of the minute detail of what was discussed and just generally the general substance, including a lot of minor details or a transcription of each meeting can oftentimes be too much information that isn't useful to people down the road or creates liability, especially in a land use decision, to poke holes in what's otherwise a well-reasoned decision based on just comments being read out of context in the minutes. And then meetings also have to include references to any documents that are discussed as part of the meeting, which are usually just published and kept by the city in the agenda and AIS attachments. Oregon Public Meetings Law imposes requirements on you as a governing body of a public body, which basically means that you make decisions for the city. So first, a quorum cannot meet outside of a noticed public meeting. A meeting, or to meet, is any deliberation or discussion of Planning Commission business by a quorum of the commission. And importantly, this includes discussions over emails, by phone or by texting, and it includes serial conversations. So this is my annual reminder to you not to reply all on emails about Planning Commission business, not to text each other or have phone calls or discussions with each other outside of a noticed public Planning Commission meeting that the public can attend and participate in or view when it involves topics of business that come before the Planning Commission, like a development application, the code update project, or other things that are Planning Commission business. And a serial meeting occurs like a game of telephone. If Commissioner, I'm just going to go in the order that you appear on my screen. So if Commissioner Landon calls Commissioner McGinley and talks about tonight's application outside of a meeting, and then Commissioner McGinley calls Commissioner Salazar and relays some of Commissioner Landon's comments and adds some of her own comments, and then Commissioner Salazar calls Commissioner Cuevila and rehashes some of the prior conversation with Commissioner McGinley and adds some additional details. No 4 planning commissioners have been in the room at the same time or involved in talking all to each other directly, but through serial conversations, 4 of you, a quorum, would have participated in a meeting outside of a noticed public meeting. You would have met in violation of the law. And that would violate public meetings requirements. It's important to pay attention to the public meetings requirements because they protect the rights of the public. The public is entitled to attend all meetings virtually and physically, and that is in flux with COVID. But the important thing is that wherever we're at with COVID regulations, the public has a way to access the conversation that's going on about the public business in real time. The public has a right to participate during designated times. Not all meetings or items provide real-time ability for the public to participate and give feedback, like the work session we're doing right now. But there are other items where the public has rights to participate, and those are spelled out in our code and under state law. And then meetings also have to be accessible to persons with disabilities under the ADA. And so we have ways that we make sure that that occurs. The Zoom platform, for example, has built-in features that make the meeting more accessible to the public. And then we also provide on notice of meetings how to contact staff if there are other accommodations that are needed in advance of meetings. The goal is to make sure that anyone who has an interest in the Planning Commission's business can access the discussion that goes on with the Planning Commission and can participate meaningfully. Any questions about public meetings law? No one's popping up on screen. I know you're all there, but it's a little weird that you're all, there we go. Great, ask your question.
So meetings or serial phone calls, like the stuff that I got a message today about whether we wanted to meet virtually or in the real world. Would that be something that should not be done?
That is a great question. And I'm glad you asked that. I meant to touch on that and I didn't. So there is a small subset of things that necessarily you have to talk about outside of a meeting. Whether and how and where to meet is one of those items. So I don't want to pick on Lane County, but unfortunately, Lane County Board of County Commissioners was the case law example from our community where the serial meetings rule came out of. And part of the conversation, part of the serial meeting conversation that they had in Lane County was whether to call an emergency meeting. So they had a serial conversation among commissioners several years back about whether to call an emergency meeting on a topic. So that discussion about whether to meet or how the meeting would happen, when and where, that has to happen outside of a public meeting sometimes because you don't have a meeting scheduled to have that conversation. It's an administrative detail. But a conversation about business that would otherwise come in front of the planning commission meeting, that would not be okay. So if in the, and I spoke with Chair McGinley about this actually before she reached out to you that was acceptable under public meetings law, but it couldn't include the discussion outside of a meeting about whether to meet virtually or in person can't include then also substantive conversations about, well, we have this application coming up. And so this application coming up, we probably want to impose conditions of approval, and it will be easier to do that if we're online or, so it can't, you have to be careful to keep it to those administrative and scheduling details and not verge into substantive discussions on applications or other business. Great question. And if you have questions about that, you can always reach out to staff either through Brenda or directly to me. I'm always happy to answer those questions. So the next slide is what and when are procedures strictly required? So parliamentary procedure is generally what governs public meetings. It is the most useful as a structure to guide decision-making. And so particularly when decision-making is complex or it may be contested, it's a great format. It also is very useful to follow procedure in order to protect the voice and rights of a minority position to make sure that all voices are heard rather than those who are the most forthcoming with their comments, for example. But I think something that's important, especially for commissions like the Springfield Planning Commission has historically been very cooperative and collaborative. And you've in my experience with the commission, generally valued input from all of your fellow commissioners, whether you agreed or disagreed. And so something that's important when you're in that mode is that you can deviate from parliamentary procedure with unanimous consent of the commission. So if no one on the commission feels that their voice is not being heard and it ought to, then you can, dispense with really formal procedures to govern, how you debate an application or its requirements if it's not an area where a lot of strict procedure is called for. I see a hand raised. Do you want to chime in with your question?
Yeah. So does that spill over, like last meeting, we had somebody that wanted to make a public comment and there's a particular time and place for that. And we missed that. And we voted to kind of go back and hear that public comment. Is that part of what you're getting at here? That's part of it, or is it a little different than that?
Yeah, I'm talking about two things. So that's hearing procedure and less parliamentary procedure. But yes, the Planning Commission can go back and change the order of hearings procedures and can decide to hear more public comment. It is generally good to get a vote on those types of, on a hearing procedure, it's good to document something with a vote just to show we're deviating from the norm. And that kind of goes to the agenda setting stuff I talked about earlier. What I'm talking about here is largely parliamentary procedure, which is, like Robert's Rules of Order would say that before you can have any discussion on an item for business, you have to have a motion that has to be seconded and put on the table before you can even begin any debate. The Planning Commission historically has discussed the merits of an application and maybe changes to conditions of approval or changes to findings, and had that as a broad discussion without any specific motion being made or seconded. And then once there's sort of agreement or a straw poll that you've got a majority position, then someone makes a motion, a formal motion about what to do on the application, and the commission votes. So that's deviating from sort of the normal parliamentary procedure. If there was a commissioner who felt it was inappropriate to have that conversation before a motion was made, they could raise a point of order and require someone to state a motion before you had that discussion about the application. But it historically hasn't really been necessary for the Planning Commission to follow Robert's Rules of Order to that level of detail. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. But so the second point, this kind of goes to your second point. It is important to follow the code for public hearings. So wait, skip back. I don't miss it. So the code allows the commission to suspend a rule of procedure or to deviate from procedures by a majority vote. If that procedure or, adhering to that procedure isn't required by some other law. So the Planning Commission could not, for example, vote to not hear any rebuttal testimony from the applicant. Like by law, an applicant always has the right to rebut. In a quasi-judicial hearing, an applicant has the right to rebut the last, comments made in a hearing. So the Planning Commission couldn't vote to suspend that piece of it. But like you did last week, you could vote to go back and call the order of the hearing again to allow people who came late to a meeting to provide testimony. And then Oregon land use law similarly says you can deviate from procedures as long as they don't prejudice a party. And so prejudice would mean that somebody doesn't have a fair chance to exercise their rights. So again, voting to prohibit someone from speaking who otherwise might have a right to have their voice heard would not be allowed. And then a planning commissioner who has a question about the procedures can always raise a point of order. And then that means that we basically stop everything we're doing and we figure out where we're at with the meeting and what procedure we need to follow. And the city attorney's office and planning manager, who that's me and Sandy or Mary Bridget and Sandy in most meetings. And then Sandy, you have your hand raised, just feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, with the COVID situation, we are deviating somewhat from the public hearing procedure in that we have phone calls at the end rather than trying to mix them in, for, against, or neutral. We're just putting all the phone calls at the end for an expeditious way, but everybody can still have their chance to speak. And then the applicant, as Christina said, still has that rebuttal opportunity. So that's a situation where we have deviated consistently for the past year.
Yeah, great example. Okay, if there aren't any other questions on that, I'm going to go to just this is the simple version of making a motion. So first, the chair announces the order of business, and there's no motion needed to announce the order of business if you're just following the agenda. If you want to deviate from the agenda, then you would need a motion and to vote on that. After following the order of business, the chair recognizes the speaker. And then typically under Robert's rules, the speaker would make a motion. This is like parliamentarians' pet peeve, is that to make a motion, you say, I move that, and then what you want done. You don't say I motion to. I think the Planning Commission is actually really good at using the right words, but that will be a pet peeve for some people to hear I motion to. The correct terminology is I move that. And then the important thing is that if a person makes a motion, they are not bound to vote in favor of that motion if they get new information or if the motion changes or they've changed their view. But you generally under parliamentary procedure should not bring forward a motion that you know you would not vote for in bad faith. Sometimes someone just needs to get a motion out there so you can have debate and then vote it down. So that's not really in bad faith, but it's not a binding. So if you just need to get a motion out there to have discussion, don't feel like you're then obligated to vote for it. After a motion is made, the motion is seconded. And then there may be sometimes discussion to modify the motion. And at that stage, the modification doesn't need to be seconded if the chair accepts it and puts it into play by stating it for the commission. But if somebody objects to the modification, then we could just start with a new motion and seconding process. This usually comes up like someone states a motion to adopt the staff report and forgets that you've all just discussed and are in favor of, like, you know, the staff report with the condition of approval that's typed on the screen, and just forgets to reference that condition of approval. It gets seconded before someone catches it, and you say, wait, you mean approve the staff report with the changes we've talked about? And they say, oh yes, that's what I meant. And then we go from there. So it's designed to be a little bit flexible if things aren't stated correctly. And then this was my attempt to make it look prettier. And then after that, so when you have debate on an item, the debate should be, so you make a motion and it's seconded and the chair states it by putting it into play. Then debate should be under formal Robert's rules. So debate should be limited to immediately the question, which is the motion that was made. You can amend a motion. So for example, if there was a motion made to approve the application, that was seconded, then you have discussion. And in that discussion, some commissioners would like to add a condition of approval to require all houses to be painted green. Then that would, if you're following formal procedure, then a commissioner would, I move that we add a condition of approval to require all houses to be painted green. That gets seconded and then restated by the chair. Then the discussion is limited to just whether the staff report should be amended with a condition of approval to paint all houses green. You would not, until you voted on that amendment, you would not go back to talking about other things in the staff report, like the trip generation study. So then once that amendment is voted on, you would go back to, then that would become, if it passes, it would become part of the original motion. It would just become part of the staff report, and then you would still go back to vote on the entire, you know, do you approve the application with that staff report or not? In this, in the formal Robert's rules, any commissioner at any time can call for an immediate vote if you want to cut off debate or discussion by saying, I call the previous question, or I call the questions of, and you could just say, I want to vote now on whether the houses should all be painted green and whether to approve the application. I want to vote on all of it. I don't want to talk about anything anymore. And then you would, the goal of that would be to just vote for everything in sequence without going back to discussion on any item. When a commissioner calls the previous question, you first have to vote on whether to vote, but you don't get to debate on whether to vote. So it's just simply a, I want to vote now. If a majority agrees that we should vote now, then you vote and you don't have any more discussion on it. But if a majority does not agree that you're ready to vote, then you go back to debate until either someone calls the question again and it passes, or until the chair just, it's clear that no one else wants to speak and the chair just calls for a vote without objections. In the land use realm, it's important to know that if a motion to approve an application doesn't pass, then that is not the same as denying the application. So if a motion to approve doesn't pass, then you must either continue discussing until you can approve the application with additional conditions, or continue your discussion until you have can pass a motion to deny the application with whatever findings are required to do that. And final decisions of the Planning Commission have to be in writing, they have to be based on findings of fact, and they have to be supported by substantial evidence in the record, which is typically your staff report and accompanying documents that staff forward to the commission. Any questions on that piece of it? That was kind of dense procedural information, I realize. Okay, I will go on to the next slide. Okay, public hearings. So this is a subset of, within a public meeting, you can have a public hearing. In a public hearing, the presiding officer takes on the role of sort of running that public hearing. The presiding officer is the Planning Commission chair, or in the chair's absence, the vice chair. And the role of the presiding officer is to regulate the course and decorum of the hearing, to rule on procedural requests, rule on offers of proof or relevance of evidence submitted, and then to rule on challenges of bias to individual commissioners under the development code. And if the need to rule on any of those procedural matters come up, again, staff are a good resource for those questions. The chair's duty is also to impose reasonable time limits on those who testify. Typically, the Planning Commission has followed the City Council's rules for public hearings and provided a 3-minute limit, but the Commission has extended that when you've thought that it was prudent and reasonable to do that. And then the presiding officer's role is to take other action that's appropriate for the meeting, which could include, for example, just enforcing the order and rules. So if someone gets up to speak in a physical meeting, or turns on their mic and camera in an online meeting out of turn, then the commission, the presiding officer or chair could turn off their mic or ask them to please take a seat, and it really doesn't get to this in Springfield, but even if someone doesn't follow the rules of the hearing, could order them to leave the hearing if they're not capable of adhering to the commission's rules of conduct. Any questions on that piece of it? All right, the order of procedure for a hearing is set out in the Springfield Development Code. And this is that order of a public hearing that you generally have to follow unless you vote to change it. And in voting to change the order of the hearing, you can't conflict with a statutory requirement, a state law requirement, or cause prejudice to a participant in the hearing. So the first thing the chair does, obviously, is open the hearing. That's followed by an explanation of the criteria of approval and a legal disclaimer for the quasi-judicial hearing, which generally the city attorney's office provides. Then the commission discloses any conflicts of interest, any biases on the application, or any ex parte contacts. And a conflict of interest is when a commissioner, if a commissioner has an actual conflict of interest, if their decision or recommendation on that item, it would be just a decision for an actual conflict. If their decision on that item would result in a financial benefit or avoiding a financial detriment to the commissioner, their business, their immediate relative as defined in law, or their immediate relative's business. If there's an actual conflict of interest, the commissioner has to recuse themselves from any further participation in that item. And if it's a potential conflict of interest, it means it only could do one of those. The decision or recommendation could have a financial impact on the commissioner, their relative, or a business associated with the commissioner or relative. And then at that point, it's the commissioner's discretion whether to continue participating or not. Commissioners also have to disclose other sources of bias other than conflicts of interest, and bias for the purpose of a land use public hearing. A bias is anytime a commissioner has predetermined their course of action, how they're going to vote on the application before they've heard all of the evidence. So if there was a commissioner that had a strongly held belief that we should never ever approve bowling alleys in Springfield, and the That commissioner would never vote for anything that ever approved a bowling alley, regardless of the facts of the application or the criteria of approval. Then that would be an actual bias. The commissioner would have to disclose that actual bias, and then the commissioner couldn't participate in that process because of their bias. And then ex parte contacts are communications on a quasi-judicial matter that a commissioner has outside of the scope of the public hearing. And the purpose of that is for commissioners to state if they have evidence or information that the rest of the commission doesn't have, so that the rest of the commission can have the same information in making its decision. And it also allows the applicant time to respond to that information the commissioner gathered outside of the record and hearing. Then there's a time for objections to the planning commission's jurisdiction. For example, if property was unannexed to the city, then certain types of applications go to the hearing official instead of the planning commission. And so somebody could come in and say, this is not in city limits, and therefore you don't have jurisdiction over this matter. Or they could say, say the hearing was scheduled on an item that the code doesn't say the planning commission should make a decision on, then they could object to the jurisdiction that way. Then the staff provide their report, the applicant has their opportunity to provide testimony, and then public testimony is called, and the code order provides that it is in favor and then neutral, and then those opposed to the application. As Sandy mentioned, the planning commission previously voted to deviate from that order for virtual meetings to allow people by phone to participate in a way that was less onerous on trying to call people on the phone at every item and just allow them to speak at the end. Then staff generally summarize what has been shared in the applicant's testimony and public testimony, and the applicant has a final opportunity to rebut. And then there's an opportunity to ask questions of the staff, applicant, members of the public. I know the planning commission generally has, the planning commission can ask questions of staff or the applicant during the hearing. My recommendation is that those questions be limited to clarifying questions on the information that's provided. And then if commissioners have their own questions about the application from your review before the meeting of the materials, or big questions that come up during the hearing, I recommend that you hold those until after the whole hearing process has gone through, because it helps to make sure that we hit all of the items the commission gets to everyone on the list of the hearing process. And if you need to go back to the applicant or back to a member of the public or back to staff then to provide additional information based on those bigger questions or other questions that come up, we can always repeat the process, but it's an issue if we skip something. So that helps make sure that we hit every point in the hearing. And then when there are no more questions, when you're satisfied that you have heard from everyone you want to hear from, you would close the public hearing. Once you've closed the public hearing, if you're also satisfied that you have all the written information you need to make a decision, you would close the written record. And then you can discuss policy issues, compliance with criteria of approval, and those types of, just the deliberations that you do. It's important to note that the code states that questions can be asked at this stage, but that's not really consistent with land use hearing and record requirements. And so I don't recommend that you are asking questions at this stage that require new information. Questions about whether something relates to criteria of approval or clarification of the criteria would be fine. But if you have questions about the facts or questions that require someone to provide evidence or opinion, that those should be asked before at least before the record is closed. But know that you can also always go back and reopen if you need to. And then the last part is that you issue a written decision based upon findings. And then this is just kind of a cheat sheet on when to close the hearing and record that you can reference in the future if it's helpful. I'm gonna just skip past this so that we don't go over on time, which I think I'm already over on time. And then the last section is government ethics, and then we'll do public records. So first and most importantly, you are public officials under the Oregon government ethics law. as planning commissioners, and you are personally responsible for your own ethical violations. The city and city attorney's office does not defend public officials who violate ethics law, but I am here as a resource if you have questions that are not intended to be attorney-client privilege, but just wanting general guidance before you make a decision on what the ethics rules require or how to find resources to answer your questions or those kinds of things. I am always here to be a resource to you before a decision has been made. But if you think you may have violated a rule, then I am not a good person to come to because we have no attorney-client privilege because it is an individual violation. And then the main ethical obligations under the law are that you shouldn't financially experience any financial gain from your official position, and relatives are included. I've listed who those relatives are on this slide for your information. There are very few limited exceptions to when you're allowed to receive financial gain for your position. Official compensation is one, but unfortunately the Planning Commission is unpaid. There are other exceptions for honorariums and gifts that are less than $50 as defined in state law. Reimbursement for some expenses and unsolicited professional achievement awards are also included. And then conflicts of interest, you have to avoid conflicts of interest or handle them appropriately when they do come up. And that's the same discussion under the recusal we discussed during the public hearing piece of it. But conflicts of interest, your conflicts of interest obligations extend to any item that you would come before you as a planning commissioner, even if you're not holding a public hearing on it. So for example, with the development code that we will do next, you'll declare potential conflicts of interest if you have them on that before that agenda item comes up. Conflicts of interest have to be declared at each meeting for which that item comes up, but not more than once in a meeting. So if you were to have discussion about the development code, go on to a different topic and then come back to the development code again later, you would not need to redeclare any declaration you made earlier that same meeting, but the declarations you all made at the last meeting don't carry over to this one. And then planning commissioners also annually file a verified statement of economic interest, and Brenda helps you coordinate when that is due and how to do that. It's annually due every year on April 15th. And then public records is the last thing. So a public record is any writing that contains information related to the conduct of the public's business that is prepared, owned, used, or retained by the public body or by you as public officials. You are part of the public body. So these are just some key points on public records. So the city has a duty to provide non-exempt parts of a public record when the public requests them within specific timelines set out by law. The only exception to not provide public records are listed in state law, and they include things like attorney-client privileged information, information that's compiled for criminal investigations, information that would compromise public safety, like specific security plans and those kinds of things. And there's dozens and dozens and dozens of exceptions. The planning commissioner emails, notes, and texts are all public records. So it's important for you that if you are going through the city's email system and using your planning commission assigned email that's at springfield-or.gov, then that is automatically captured by our IT department and stored as a public record. And so staff can pull those and provide them if they are requested by the public. If I'm involved in a public records request for elected or appointed officials' emails, then I always notify the person before they are disclosed, just as a courtesy. But also individually, your notes that you take, if you keep a document with notes, then you can email them to yourself so they're captured in the city's email system, or save them on your iPad so it's archived that way. And then also texts that relate to public business are public records, and so avoiding having text messages about city business is a good practice to avoid generating public records on your personal devices. The city is required to retain public records according to a retention schedule that's published by the Secretary of State. And if you have questions about that, what that is, then I'm a good resource, or AJ Knights in the city manager's office, whose city recorder is also a good resource on that. And then just some real quick examples of retention timelines that are required. So comprehensive plan documents, so the Metro Plan, for example, or the Springfield Comprehensive Plan, those are required to be kept permanently. There's a 10-year requirement to keep land use appeal files, and there's a 1-year requirement to keep desk notes or notes from meetings. So if you keep a binder of notes that you take or a legal pad of notes that you take during meetings, then you would keep those for a year before you're allowed to dispose of them. And the city has a form that you can use to document when you've destroyed public records according to that schedule. And then this slide, this is in your packet, so you should be able to access these materials through the packet that was posted, but these are resources that are updated from versions of the resource guide I've given you in the past. Some of the resources on that guide have been combined into one webpage or updated. So I think these are, I mean, I've narrowed it down to 5 resources. These are great things for you to bookmark on your web browser or just be really familiar with. Especially the ethics guide is very comprehensive, and the public meetings and public records manual resources are extremely comprehensive. And almost any question you could ask me, I will go to those documents first before giving you an answer. So it's a good thing for you to be familiar with as well. I know we went a little over on time, but are there any questions?
Christina, I'll just say thank you for this presentation, for making it so clear and user-friendly. I am thankful that this will be on YouTube now. So just letting all the commissioners and anybody who may be watching this, now we have this really amazing half-hour training on YouTube to go back and reference if we need it. And then, as Christina mentioned, the full packet with the PowerPoint slides in it that you can click on links on. It's on Springfield Oregon Speaks. So glad that we have that online resource, and very thankful for staff that keeps us in check. So thank you, Christina.
Yeah, and if you have questions, then please, if you do have questions that come up, please reach out to me directly, or if you don't have my contact info at hand, then Brenda can direct questions to me. So just, we are here as a resource. Don't tell me you violated a law after the fact, please, but come to me in advance and we'll work through whatever kinds of questions you have. If I don't know the answer, I'll figure out who can get it for you. Thanks. I will stop screen sharing now.
Okay, any last questions before we move on to the next topic in our work session? Okay, seeing none, I will now hand it over to Mark Rust for the Development Code Update Project. But before that, we'll feature Christina briefly again to give us a statement regarding conflicts of interest.
Yeah, my apologies. I just have to switch documents and I'm not as quick as I thought that I would be. So just as a reminder for the commission, as we just covered this, but again, the conflict of interest is any decision that could or would impact a commissioner's financial interest, the financial interest of their business, or financial interest of their family member or family member's business. For the code update project, commissioners can only have a potential conflict of interest. And that's because you make a final recommendation to the city council that adopts the code. The commission's future recommendation to the city council isn't binding on the council, so it cannot result in an actual conflict of interest. Commissioners with potential conflicts of interest must disclose the nature of the conflict and then can participate in the work session. One example of a potential conflict of interest related to the code update project is owning residential or commercial land in Springfield, because property values may be affected by the proposed code changes.
Thank you, Christina. With that, I will call on commissioners one by one to disclose any potential conflicts of interest. I will start with myself. I do not own property, so I have no potential conflicts of interest. Vice Chair Landon.
I have a potential conflict of interest in that I own property in Springfield.
Commissioner Puebla.
I own real property in Springfield.
Commissioner Gill.
I also own property in Springfield, so have a potential conflict of interest.
Commissioner Salazar.
I have two potential conflicts of interest. One that I own residential property in Springfield, and two that I work for a residential real estate developer that operates in Springfield.
And Commissioner Buck.
I have two potential conflicts of interest. One that I own property in Springfield and also professionally write insurance for residential property owners in Springfield.
Thank you, everyone. And now I'll hand it over to Mark.
Great. Thank you, Chair McGinley, and good evening, commissioners. I'm back before you tonight to discuss more of the draft development code sections. Kind of pick up where we left off last meeting. Again, just to kind of reiterate that the intent of these work sessions is to familiarize the planning commissioners with the draft code sections that are currently out for public review and comment. This isn't necessarily a formal feedback loop at this point. I am interested in the commissioners' comments or questions, but there will be a formal process as we move into the fall for starting the public hearing and then the deliberations by the planning commission. So this is not the time for deliberations at this point, and we're not looking for any formal recommendations. That will happen again, as I said, later in this calendar year. But I will incorporate comments and questions I hear from the commission into all the other public comments I'm getting at this point to develop from these draft public hearing review, or excuse me, the draft public comment sections to finalize a public hearing draft. So there will be changes made from these drafts that you're seeing to the public hearing draft based on all the public input, including yours. Let me see. So last meeting, we went through the procedures ordinance. Christina was just talking a bit about all those procedures, and if tonight's training from Christina raised any questions about some of what we talked about in the procedure section last time, I'm always happy to revisit, or we could get back into questions about the procedures. But tonight, we also just began to start to talk about the industrial districts section, and that's where I was going to start tonight. Because we didn't really get all the way through it, we just started to kind of highlight a few things. And then move from the industrial districts to the commercial districts. And I'm going to share my screen here. And then if, depending on time, we will, I think you should be able to see my screen now. Then there's additional sections in your packet tonight as well. Beyond the industrial and commercial zone sections, there's the draft development standard sections. I do intend to roll this meeting packet over to the next meeting, your August 17th meeting. I'm actually out of the office this week on vacation, but wanted to keep these work sessions going. And so being that I won't be able to prepare the packet for next meeting, being out of the office, I'll just continue to use this packet for next meeting. So let me know if there's any questions about that. So with that, this is the industrial districts section we did start to talk about last time. One of the larger changes for this section that I mentioned last time is just condensing the table of permitted and conditionally permitted uses. So I'm going to just scroll down to this table quick. I know I'm passing over a lot of stuff. So the existing code has a very extensive list of permitted uses. And really what we've tried to do is condense that list and create what we're referring more to as categories of uses. And so this list is much shorter. It's really only about a page long. Even though there's some broad categories, there are some other things that are called out in terms of specific things that might fit in other categories, but that through the technical advisory committee input process or other feedback we've received that it was important to potentially keep some of these. So that's the way we've proposed some of this. And just scrolling back up, this is a lot of this text is the language for how those categories are defined. So instead of having exhaustive lists of different kinds of uses, defining what the broad category uses are, and then in a lot of cases, listing examples of those types of use. So heavy manufacturing and production, we define the use, really what it entails. Then we give some examples of what might be included, but it's not limited to those. So if a use comes along that is a new use or one that again isn't specifically listed here, as long as we can, find that it fits this definition, that's kind of the idea behind how these categories of uses would work. There's some exceptions here as well. So really we're relying more heavily on how these broader categories of uses are defined and laid out. That's, I think, where an opportunity to, provide some feedback from the public and to make sure these categories of uses are working the way they're intended and covering the things that they are intended to cover. Again, relying on the exceptions is another avenue to make sure there's not overlap, or maybe there is overlap and that's dealt with. So there is some, between the industrial districts and the commercial districts, there can be some similar types of things in some cases. So making sure that these work together across code sections is important as well. As you can see, and I've mentioned before, there's areas that are still highlighted. We recognize there's still some areas to be figured out and finalized. We've received comments on some sections that haven't quite been fully addressed yet. So that's, these are working drafts. The one area I want to touch on, let me make sure I didn't pass over it. I think we've talked briefly about it before, is determining if this is the similar use kind of determination, or determining how something is fit within a category. So I don't intend necessarily to keep both of these sections. I think I mentioned this before, but I think these two sections, determination of similar use category or determination of use category, that it may be that there's only a need for one of them. Really, the intent behind these two sections that still do need some work are, one is a very clear and objective determination, so it's not considered a land use under state law. If we have to use any discretion to make that determination, then it is a land use. So the idea with this first section is that it's just really talking about this is underlined, even clearly identifiable what the use, what category it would fit in, versus if it's not clear and we have to do a determination to find that it's similar, but it's based on more subjective criteria, like these things listed here, based on the goods and services provided or the operating characteristics, that kind of thing. This would be a subjective process that would be a land use process where somebody could apply for this determination. We would either make that determination as part of a larger, say, site plan review application, or separately. So those, again, need some work. They may both remain, but I think we need to clarify what the two different sets of language mean. These sections of zoning code are pretty short. I will just point out up here at the beginning, this whole second half of this section, the campus industrial district, I have not included the text of this section, all these subsections at this point. We don't intend to update those sections at this point with phase 2 of the development code update project. These may come later, but we're essentially going to adopt these sections wholesale into this section, which will make it longer, but just really with the only intent to reformat those sections to fit the new format of the code. So this will get longer, but again, there shouldn't be any substantial changes to those sections. We are relying on, as does the existing code, the special use standards. So a lot of these uses refer to a different section. 4.7 is a separate chapter of the development code. So a lot of these uses do have special standards in a different section that I don't believe we've gone over yet. That will come in a future work session. We can go over that, but just so you all understand that this section does work in conjunction also with that special use standard section. And again, there's some areas of even that section that are continuing to develop or need some fine tuning. For the most part, we're not changing a lot of the development standards within the industrial district. So a lot of this is the same language, just reformatted and simplified in a lot of cases. For the most part, it's intended to remain fairly neutral in terms of kind of, I discussed previously, the original direction from City Council was to remain policy neutral and in referencing the comprehensive plan. So because of the housing changes, based on state law changes, a lot of the housing stuff is changing more significantly, but for the most part, the opportunity for updating these non-housing sections is really intended to clean it up, reformat, and make it easier to use. And I'm happy to take questions at any time. I know I'm kind of skimming over a lot of this stuff, but don't intend to go through it line by line. We have incorporated a lot of tables and things to where it can make things easier to see. Some of the tables in the existing code are so long and cumbersome to use that we've broken out some of the tables, or other places there aren't tables. So we've created new tables to help explain things. But again, for the most part, the standards themselves haven't changed. And this is really the end of this section. And I do reference this campus industrial section. Again, I still need to add a lot of the existing sections that aren't, for the most part, changing. So that's pretty much what I was going to cover on the industrial zone section. And then I was going to jump to the commercial zone section. But if there's any questions on this, I'm happy to answer them, or I'll go ahead and just go on over to commercial.
Mark, I have a question.
Sure.
Do you have like a main takeaways from the technical advisory committee on this section, the things that were challenging for them in the current code and things they wanted to see? I see a lot of that encapsulated in the comments. And I was hoping to see some of the meeting recordings on YouTube, but I did not.
Yeah, the majority of the TAC meetings happened before COVID, and I'll have to check with Brenda on how many of them may have happened virtually and therefore we have video recordings of. I know we do have minutes from all the meetings. I think they're all on the project webpage, but I don't know about the YouTube videos of any of the TAC meetings. I can double check on that. Let me make a note.
Okay. Thank you.
But in terms of large takeaways, I mean, there's some pretty fine points I think that you can get into. And as you reference, some of these comments allude to TAC members having made comments about certain things. I think some of the difficult part of, and I'd say it probably happens more in the campus industrial zone, but in all the zones, really, this question of what constitutes a change of use or not comes up quite a bit. And so, for instance, if something fits within the industrial zone and is an industrial use, but say it's primarily office type uses, even though it's office supporting or fitting within industrial, but then say that tenant or that user moves out and a new user wants to move in, and it's still just basically the same use in terms of it still being basically office, but it happens to be supporting a different category use, a different, like a commercial or something that isn't qualified as industrial. So it's this question about if it's really office to office, but the type of company that the office is supporting is just different from industrial versus non-industrial. Is it really a change of use? So trying to deal with that concern through providing these broader categories of uses, you know, even due to COVID, but even pre-COVID, there's some change in what industry really means. So a lot of uses might typically fall into what feels like an industrial category, but for all intents and purposes, it doesn't really have any of the historical kind of industrial impacts. And I think that's where our campus industrial zone tries to bridge that gap. But, and again, we're not proposing to change the campus industrial zone at this point with the code update, but I think there will be future opportunity to deal with some of that in updating the campus industrial zone and kind of reanalyzing what should or should not maybe be allowed in there. Healthcare is one that's specific to, it's like, where does, say, a pharmaceutical company fall depending on what they do, if they're manufacturing just doing, or versus doing R&D or doing office support kind of thing. Is that, at what point is any of that industrial or not? So I would say that's probably the biggest takeaway. I think a lot of the other comments or input from the TAC related to probably industrial zone stuff is really probably better addressed through the site plan review process, because it's how we implement the zones that really is where there's more questions about. Again, if there's a change of use, when is a site required to be updated to all current standards versus if it's developed not necessarily in accordance with current standard. So hopefully that kind of answers your question about the big takeaways at this point, but I'll look for those minutes. And again, I know the minutes are on the project webpage, but I'll work with Brenda to find out about any videos that happened for TAC meetings.
Great, thank you, Mark. And in the queue, I have Commissioner Quibala, followed by Commissioner Gill.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark. A couple of questions in regard to the industrial code. I tried to get the actual code sections this time instead of getting the page of the packet, since I knew it'd be more helpful to you. Mostly in regard to, it would be impacts on neighborhoods. There's I believe 3.2.325A, I do not see a side yard setback there in that section. Maybe I may have missed it. And then in regard to impacts on particularly residential zones, when I'm looking at 3.2.325B, 3.2.425B, and then the use tables. First of all, it says that the height can be what is in the residential now. I believe, is that not now 35 feet?
Currently, our at least the low density residential is 35 feet. I think
Okay.
That's correct. Maybe
Great.
30. I don't have that in front of me necessarily, but
Okay, and then the setbacks from residential for, it looks like for heavy industrial and for light medium industrial are also only 10 feet. And then when I get to the use tables, it shows that some of those uses in there can be waste related, fabrication shop, heavy manufacturing, et cetera. Now, I'm not sure if those are existing setbacks and existing language or not, but to me, a 10-foot setback to a 35-foot building that's, say, doing metals fabrication, that should be a little further back from a residential zone than 10 feet. Same thing with waste-related or heavy manufacturing, because I've worked in, in heavy manufacturing and around metals fab, and it's a very intensive land use with a lot of fumes, a lot of, and an awful lot of noise. So just a couple of comments there. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Commissioner Gill.
Thanks, Chair and Mark, for all of your work again. I'm not turning on my video because the host has disallowed my video sharing, which is fine, but I just wanted you to know why. So two things that came up to me for this one, up for me with this one. The first one is up with the purpose. And I know that we're not necessarily supposed to talk about purpose. It's more about structure and making the process clearer and more straightforward. However, I think because we're engaging the public in the development code, we will probably get some things that people want in there. And I think it's important to collect that for staff and for city council to consider. And so in number one, and I'll mention this in a couple of the other sections when we get to them, but it talks about Springfield's natural heritage. And I think the cultural heritage is a significant aspect of community in the city. And it is part of the state planning goals also. So I just wanted to bring that up, that is not there. And I think it would be great to have there. I understand if it's not part of this process, but I still think it's valuable for that to be heard.
I think that's a great comment. So thanks for that.
Thank you. And then one more thing, and this might be a weird structural thing, so take it as a point of conversation. But as I said before, I'm trying to read this as somebody who maybe doesn't do development all the time, but wants to do one of these things. So when I'm looking at this and I get down to the permitted uses, it starts out talking about like how those uses can't come about and which things are exempted. And it made it really sort of disconnected for me. I feel like it might be helpful, and this is in a lot of the other sections, to have the uses first. So I can look at it and be like, okay, I think I might be this. And then I can read down about how those conclusions are made and which things are exempt or not. And maybe that is a big planning no-no. But I just wanted to throw it out there because I found that in a lot of sections. If I'm reading this like a book, like in order, I had so many questions during that part about what that means for what I want to do. But if I'd had that permitted uses list first, and I could make some guesses about what I might be, and then I could go into the detail and figure out that detail, I feel like that would have been helpful for my thinking process about how this applies. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah, so, and maybe just to clarify, so you're suggesting the use table itself be above like all this language about industrial use categories?
Potentially.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair comment for sure. And I don't think there's any big planning no this is we can't do that. I mean, we can write the code for the most part. And I think it makes sense, especially, now just thinking about these languages here too, about determination, putting that up front is pretty dry stuff as well. So that could probably even go at the end of those other categories. But so I can definitely,
because if I disagree, like if I look at that chart and I'm like, oh, I don't think mine fits under this, then I would go find out why and how that came to be. Or if I want to figure out the parameters around one of them, I would have a starting point. It just feels a little out of context for me with all of that at the beginning. So That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great. And not to be mean about it, but I'm sure as soon as we change that, then somebody else will comment and say, I think, you know, the table doesn't make any sense. So if all you do is put it first, but anyway, so yeah.
For sure. I just wanted to throw it in for the conversation. I know staff is smart and I trust them, but as somebody who isn't using it all the time, that's kind of came up to me.
I think your comment makes sense. I think it's definitely something we can look at, and even for the other sections as well. So this one especially is probably pretty heavily loaded up front with all this other text. And it just kind of evolved that way. So I probably at some point lost track of the order. Anyway, so definitely a good comment.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I think with that, I don't see any other questions at this point. I know we are cut short for a little bit of time tonight. So we're at about 6:45 now. I think I will, unless I see any other hands pop up, go ahead and jump into the commercial district section. And we'll see how far we get and then go from there. But this is laid out very similarly, and the intent was a lot of the same as what I talked about with the industrial stuff. So again, these use determination categories and things like that. Again, based on Commissioner Gill's comments, I think it may make sense to move this language down lower. So that's not the first thing you see, because people are going to be potentially thrown off by that. But a couple of things. So again, focusing on the commercial use categories themselves, how we're defining these. This is kind of all new for our code, and differentiating between what we're calling automobile dependent uses, automobile oriented uses, and then non-automobile dependent oriented uses. So it's kind of a level of intensity. Really, it's trying to deal with, for the most part, for drive-throughs and things, you know, the impacts from different categories of uses can necessitate different ways of dealing with them. Like Commissioner Quavula talked about setbacks. So it might depend on setbacks for something with a drive-through versus non-drive-through sort of things. Again, that can get tricky oftentimes when we are talking about changes of use. So say something is a retail business and then it changes to a restaurant where they want to add a drive-through. So what, you know, the standards may prevent something from going from a non-automobile to an auto-dependent use, depending on how the property is developed and those types of things. But anyway, so we're relying again on these categories to help us guide then this much shorter use table. And this one is a bit longer than the industrial one. And again, we have broken out certain things like a garden supply and feed store. Well, that would probably fit under retail. But, and again, it's probably this one off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure it's a relic that's in our existing code, and the technical advisory committee thought this one has special standards as well that's specific, and we could look at those. But it warrants being a separate use. Same thing with like animal hospital. So that, again, it may fall under another category, but it's a specific use. So even though we are trying to create these broad categories, there are cases where we have called out specific uses in some instances. I did mention that previously. I know in the industrial zones, specifically the marijuana businesses, because those are treated differently under state law and have their own section of special standards, we felt it's important to keep those as separate. Oftentimes too, because the certain uses are not allowed specifically in certain zones, having them be within a broader category makes them more difficult to call out that they're not allowed in certain uses or in certain zones if they are clumped up into a broader category. Within the commercial zone, It's kind of a wider variety of uses. So your typical type of commercial retail, as well as we break out these categories of lodging. Again, I mentioned kind of some overlap between some industrial and commercial. There isn't some limited industrial type uses allowed in just one of the 4 commercial districts. So there is, again, some of that overlap, making sure the 2 sections work in conjunction. And then some also residential uses, transportation facilities, other. And then the public and institutional uses. So again, trying to deal with a lot of these as categories, but also calling out some specific uses. And where I'll mention here under public and institutional, there's a lot of state law that regulates some of these uses, specifically childcare facilities, places of worship, those types of things. There's state law that we have to be in compliance with very specifically. So they warrant probably calling out separately, and that's why they're specifically listed and not necessarily just a broad category. So again, so with both industrial and now here in commercial, we've basically tried to keep all the development standards the same. We haven't proposed drastically different or different at all changes to the development standards, which are primarily the setbacks and lot size and height, things like that. So these are just reformatted primarily into easier to use tables and things like that, spelled out a little differently. Again, the setback table, height limits, and similar with industrial, and a little bit to Commissioner Quavula's point about when there's an industrial zone, or in this case, a commercial zone abutting residential, there's oftentimes different standards for when something's abutting residential. So in this case, this height standard is different if it's, does it use the word abutting, permitted, adjacent? So the term adjacent's used here. I can't remember if we changed them all to adjacent. Those terms are all defined in the chapter 6 that I've provided you previously as well, how the terms are defined, adjacent or abutting. And again, so this section again is pretty short. We've tried to condense it. Like I said, it's a bit easier to use. Again, I'll just point out here that we're relying on these special use standard sections for a lot of the standards specific to different uses. So this section has to work in close, work closely with that other special use section. And I think that's a really high level overview of this section. I'm happy to take questions on this at this point. I think considering the previous comments, the purpose statement probably warrants talking about the natural heritage here again. There's some conversation or some, I guess, thought that's been had about whether or not or when it's appropriate to contain purpose statements in general. And so whether, the intent is for these code sections to implement the comprehensive plan, and we're trying to stay consistent with the existing comprehensive plan. A lot of these purpose statements are language that come directly out of the comprehensive plan. So for what it's worth, it may be an opportunity to look at our comprehensive plan in the long run as well. But it doesn't mean we can't have a purpose statement that is, as long as it's consistent with the comp plan, slightly potentially worded differently, if that makes sense. Anyway, with that, that's the commercial zone high overview at this point. Any thoughts or questions?
I'm not seeing, oh, I just saw here. Sorry about that. Commissioner Gill.
Sorry, I'm talking a lot with this stuff, but I did want to just say in this section, I think I think it covers it well, but I think it's very important in this section for, especially for areas like downtown, that the ability to have perhaps a manufacturing plus a wholesale plus a retail plus an office use for a business is the only way for that business to survive in a downtown situation, a small business thing. So like, say it's a soap maker, right? And they can use that same building to do all four of those things. I think this does that. I just want to make sure through the process that maintains, because that's in some cases the only way. Like they couldn't survive on retail in our downtown, but if they can do wholesale and have a little bit of retail that makes our downtown lively, but really their bread and butter is online sales, then that's a thing. So I think this does this. I just want to sort of give a nod to that and make sure that we try to maintain that, because it's pretty critical.
Yeah, and that's a great comment. The this doesn't, so there is a whole separate section of code that deals with, or that it contains our mixed use zones. So this commercial zone section does not cover the mixed use sections, which includes downtown specifically, but there are a bunch of mixed use, like the Booth Kelly area south of downtown has its own separate mixed use overlay zone. Downtown is mixed use commercial, I think, for the most part, or has a mixed use overlay. So these four primary commercial zones are not all inclusive of all the commercial throughout the city. We chose at the outset of the Code Update project to not include an update primarily of downtown, but at this point, phase 3 of the project, which is yet to come, is where we would tackle the broader mixed use overlay zones. So these are a little bit more limited than what you're talking about, but I think your comment is still important in that we do need to be mindful of that. And we know that our mixed use zones still do need some work. In fact, we're dealing with a use right now that's moving into the Booth Kelly mixed use district that is doing kind of exactly what you're saying. They kind of do a little bit of everything. So figuring out how they fit can be a little tricky with those antiquated, in some cases, mixed use districts. So those do need attention as well. And we'll look forward to making some of those updates in those mixed use zones in the near future. Great. Well, I think we're almost out of time, but I'll just give a quick preview, I think, to 2 weeks from now on the 17th. I'll be back, and where I'll intend to start is we'll start jumping into what I kind of broadly talk about is the development standards sections. There's a number of them, at least 5 sections included in your packet for tonight's meeting. The first of which is this transportation section. What I do want to mention for you to all think about as you look through these sections in preparation for the future work sessions where we'll talk about them. This first one in particular is basically, I know I've mentioned that I'm not doing track changes versions of the existing code because it's basically all new code. And this is an exception to that. This is basically a track change version of the existing code. And the reason for that is some of you will recall having been on the Planning Commission when we just fairly recently went through the TSP update process. And we updated and modernized this whole section already within the last, I think, 2 years, maybe 2.5. And so for the most part, all we did to this section was reformat it and then provided some track changes to kind of update some of the words. You'll see all where I deleted, my pet peeve of the word shall and changed them all to musts, or most of them to musts, but just other minor edits. Again, we reworked this table very thoroughly in the recent past. Just some, for consistency's sake, kind of changing things from numerals to spelling out numbers anyway, pretty minor changes. So for the most part, this section is the same. You know, we're changing terminologies, moving away from using the word family for like multi-family housing. So talking about multi-unit housing instead. So again, just some minor changes, but this one section in particular is basically just a track change version of the existing code section with some minor edits and reformatting. But then the additional development standard sections, this one is similar, although we've done a lot more significant editing to this. And as you'll see here, let's see. Okay, now I was looking for a purpose statement here and it's not. In some cases, in previous drafts of the code, there were actual footnotes and comments about where the purpose statements came from. And again, I could probably find those and provide, because I know there was a question in the previous sections about the purpose statements. So I may look for that and provide some additional information on there. Like here, there's even a question, is this, and I'm asking this question just in the notes for my own sake, but is this a purpose statement? So just, you know, what the code is saying and making sure it's doing what we're intending. So anyway, quick preview of jumping into those development standard sections for next week. And I think at that, I'm right about at time, give you guys a minute maybe before you have to jump into your next regular session. So.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for coming in on your vacation. I'm sorry you had to do that. And I know this project has a quick deadline, fast timeline. I hope you're able to enjoy the rest of your vacation and not think about the development code. Do we have any last questions for Mark before we close the work session? Okay, with that, I adjourn the work session. Thank you, Mark. I wanted to just check in with the commissioners before the regular session because we started early today. Does anybody need like a 2-minute break? Are we ready to roll? I see some nods.
I'm ready.
Okay, ready to roll. Great. With that, it is 7 o'clock and I hereby open the regular session of the Planning Commission. I see no change in commission attendance, so I will go on to the Pledge of Allegiance. I will recite the pledge while other commissioners remain muted.
I'm trying to get it to come up here, but I don't know what it wants. Here we go. Can you see that?
I cannot. Oh, wait, it just came up.
Okay.
Okay, I see it. Thank you.
You bet.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Brenda. I would like to ask members of the audience who are joining us by phone or online to please keep yourselves on mute until you are called to provide public testimony. There are 3 times designated for the public to speak later this evening. The first is business from the audience, which is a time for anyone to speak to the Planning Commission on any subject that is not the discretionary use and site plan review application for Pierce Park that is on the agenda tonight. The second opportunity is the public hearing for Pierce Park that was continued to this evening. So there will be an opportunity to provide testimony on that application for discretionary use and site plan review. Third, there will be a separate time to address the Planning Commission in its role as Committee for Citizen Involvement during the Committee for Citizen Involvement meeting that follows the Planning Commission regular meeting tonight. If you are joining us online and wish to speak, please use the chat window. Please send a comment to the host, which is Brenda Jones, with your name, mailing address, and the subject you would like to speak about. If you want to provide testimony on Pierce Park, please also state if you are in favor, opposed, or neutral regarding the application. You can select the host only at the bottom of the chat window. Please do not use the chat feature for any other purpose during the meeting. I will call on you when it is your turn to speak. For people calling in by phone, we will announce a time for those on the phone to speak. If you do not wish to speak, just state that you do not wish to speak when called upon. And Sandy just put in the chat for folks a shortened version of what I just said. Are there any adjustments to the agenda?
I have not received anything or any requests, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We will now move on to business from the audience. Brenda, is there anyone who would like to speak for business from the audience?
I have nobody, no one has requested.
Okay. Our next item is approval of minutes from July 20th, 2021. Are there any corrections to the minutes, or do we have a motion to approve the minutes as published in the agenda packet? Commissioner Gill?
I move to approve the minutes as submitted in the packet.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Gill, seconded by Commissioner Quivla. Brenda, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Commissioner McGinley,
Aye.
Commissioner Landon,
Aye.
Commissioner Quivla,
Yes.
Commissioner Gill,
Aye.
Commissioner Bergen is absent, Commissioner Salazar,
Aye.
Commissioner Buck.
Aye.
Chair, you have 6 in favor, no, not to approve, and 1 absent.
Thank you. Motion to approve the minutes as published in the agenda packet carries unanimously. Okay. The next agenda item is time for the continued public hearing regarding site plan review and discretionary use approval for Pierce Park located north of the eWeb pathway and identified as Assessor's Map 17-02-19-33, tax lot 1500. Journal number 811-211-000-142-TYP2 and 811-211-000-143-TYP3. I will hand it over to the city attorney.
Thank you, Chair. This is a continued public hearing from the prior meeting. And so the quasi-judicial statement of legal rights for this hearing was read at that earlier hearing. But I will state that a copy of the procedures and agenda for tonight's hearing and the staff report have been posted on springfieldoregonspeaks.org, and any person with an interest in tonight's agenda can offer relevant oral or written testimony or both. And to preserve your right to appeal the decision to the City Council and ultimately the Land Use Board of Appeals, you must testify orally or in writing before the Planning Commission closes the record, which may be tonight or at a later meeting. And if you want the Planning Commission to consider your testimony, you must testify before the Commission closes the hearing or submit written evidence before the Planning Commission closes the written record. You must raise issues clearly enough so that people can understand what it is, and you must offer evidence in support of it, or else you cannot raise that issue on appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. And because this is a continued public hearing, any request to further continue the hearing or hold the record open is discretionary with the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission will have discretion whether to grant that request. Testimony must be related to the applicable criteria. The criteria for discretionary use application is provided in Springfield Development Code 5.9.120, and the criteria for tentative site plan approval is in Springfield Development Code 5.17-125. The criteria are described more in detail in the staff report. that is posted on springfieldoregonspeaks.org and will be summarized by staff tonight to the extent it wasn't already summarized at the prior meeting. Planning commissioners must be unbiased in making their decision, and so members of the Planning Commission must state whether they have any conflicts of interest, such as family, financial, or business relationships with any of the applicants or with regard to the land in question. If such a potential conflict exists, the commissioner will state whether he or she is without actual bias or whether he or she would like to step down from the Planning Commission for the remainder of the case. The Planning Commission tonight must also state whether they've discussed the application in question with any of the parties or have any independent knowledge of relevant facts, such as from a visit to the site in question. If any of the planning commissioners have had such contacts or independent knowledge, they must disclose the substance of that contact or knowledge. And then during the time for public testimony, any witness may challenge the impartiality of a planning commissioner and may rebut the substance of a planning commissioner's knowledge of the facts. The commissioner in question may respond to such a challenge. And so with that, Chair, it is appropriate to continue the public hearing and disclose any conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts or independent knowledge of relevant facts.
Thank you, Christina. So I open the public hearing and we'll call commissioners one by one to disclose any ex parte contacts or conflicts of interest. So I'll start with myself. I looked at the property on Google Maps. And so that would be an ex parte contact or more information that I had. That's it. I will go on to Vice Chair Landon.
I have no conflicts of interest and no ex parte contacts.
Thank you. Commissioner Quibbla.
No additional knowledge and no ex parte contact.
Thank you. Commissioner Gill.
I have no conflict of interest and no ex parte contact.
Thank you. Commissioner Salazar.
No conflicts of interest and no ex parte contacts.
Thank you. And Commissioner Buck.
No conflicts of interest and no ex parte contact.
Thank you. Okay, now I will hand it over to Senior Planner Melissa Carino to give updates to the staff report and additional information to the Planning Commission.
Thanks, Chair McKinley. So good evening, Planning Commissioners. Good to see you all again. Before I begin my presentation, I wanted to refer you all to the Springfield Oregon Speaks website because we did receive one last public comment yesterday evening via email.
Just checking in, it looks like Melissa is frozen for me. Are other commissioners experiencing the same thing?
That's the case for me.
Yeah,
Okay.
looks like she's stuck. I'll walk over. She's here to see what's going on.
Okay, let's pause and we will just have her restart.
Commissioner McKinley, I know what she was going to say, and I've shared this comment that we received yesterday. So while she's getting reconnected, the commissioners can read this comment on the screen that was also uploaded into Springfield Oregon Speaks as a document.
Okay, thank you, Sandy.
Sorry.
Melissa, the commission is reading the additional comment made, but looks like you are unfrozen and moving smoothly now, so you can proceed when you are ready.
Thank you. And sorry about that technical glitch. So tonight I'm providing you an updated presentation hold on just one second, for both the site plan and discretionary use applications for a new Willamette Lane neighborhood park called Pierce Park. This presentation will address the concerns raised during the public hearing at our last meeting on July 20th, as well as the public comment you just read. But let me provide the background information of the proposal again first. So the subject site is comprised of 2 different tax lots.
Melissa, just
Yeah.
checking in, are you intending to share a screen right now?
Yes, thank you. Hold on just one second. Can you see it now?
Not yet.
Okay, how about now?
Yes.
That's good.
Perfect. All right, again, the subject site is comprised of 2 different tax lots adjacent to each other. The subject site is located south of Briggs Middle School, north of the E-Web pathway, west of 31st Street, and east of the end of Otto Street. Let's see. Here's another view of the subject site that was provided by Willamette Lane. And here's a detailed site plan of Pierce Park, a neighborhood park with a kids' bicycle playground. So real quickly, the site plan review application again applies to both parcels, making up the subject site, while the discretionary use application only applies to the eastern parcel. The western parcel is zoned to public lands and open space. And neighborhood parks are permitted use in this PLO zoning. Here's the proposed site plan for the western parcel of Pierce Park, which includes walking paths, age-appropriate play areas, a central meeting place with a picnic shelter, drinking fountains, and a basketball court. Oops, sorry. And then here are some photos of the neighborhood park features at other Willamette Lane parks in the community, which will serve as models for the features at Pierce Park. The eastern parcel is zoned medium density residential, and discretionary use approval is required for the applicant's proposal for a neighborhood park in MDR zoning according to the Springfield Development Code. There are also specific development standards for parks in residential areas, which this proposal meets. One thing I wanted to highlight was finding 81 in the staff report. And just to share with the commission and the community, the eastern parcel, while zoned MDR, was not included in the city's residential buildable lands inventory. And here's the proposed site plan for the eastern parcel of Pierce Park, which includes a gravel walking path and a kids' bicycle playground. And I wanted to include these updated photos that can give you a taste of the features offered in the kids' bicycle playground. All right, included in your packet tonight is a revised staff report for this request. There's actually been a few more changes made, which I will share up on the screen. Hold on just one second. There you go. We left the tracking changes on so you can easily review the changes. Really quickly to summarize, let me just go ahead and go through the staff report. We included comments that were received at the July 20th public hearing. We also included the public comment that just came in yesterday evening. I'm going to let folks read that last section because that was just added. Moving on. We added new findings based on the public comments received at the July 20th meeting. And let me get to that point. So starting at finding 15, and you'll see some of the other changes that have been made on the staff report since this was shared on Springfield, Oregon Speaks. Oh, geez. Finding 16. And then we also have findings 18 and 19. I apologize, 15 and 16 was addressing the concerns about screening. Whereas findings 18 through 21 is dealing with the concerns around motor vehicular circulation, especially along Otto Street, and parking for the park. So keep going, these have not changed, but let's go to finding 21 so you could see that update. One thing to note as you're reading finding 21 was that we added a condition of approval number 3 in the staff report that you received or can access through Springfield Oregon Speaks, and that has actually been removed because of finding 21. We are no longer requiring the applicant to do this in order to get approval. Christina, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions. That was a change I made. So if the commission has questions, I'm happy to talk about it. It comes down to what's within the authority of the applicant versus just what's in the city's authority and doesn't need to be a condition of approval.
Thank you. And let me keep going. And we added finding 24. Thank you, Christina, for adding that as well. And this is specifically addressing the public comment we received yesterday evening about the request to not allow pedestrian access off of Otto Street. And then just the conditions of approval is to make sure that there is enough vegetative screening along the northern property line of the eastern parcel that complies with the requirements of the Development Code 4.4110.b.1. Oh, I believe someone's raising their hand.
Commissioner Buck, and all commissioners, can we limit questions to clarifying questions? So if you have a clarifying question, go ahead, Commissioner Buck.
Yes, my clarifying question was on the portion before about the no parking signs, and I was your comment, Melissa, was regarding, or possibly it was Councilor Katz, what's in the applicant's authority and what's in the city's authority, and I was a little confused as to what you were meaning by that.
I'm happy to explain. So parking in the code is referenced there. So parking on city streets is regulated by the Development and Public Works Department. So we don't need an applicant or property owner to agree to restrict parking. And the applicant doesn't, William being the applicant, they don't have any authority to require or prevent the city from marking that as a prohibited parking area. And so a condition of approval is usually something that the applicant is required to do or is binding on the decision into the future. And then can be the basis, for example, of code enforcement or not approving the final site plan if it's not done. But in this case, it's a change being made on a city street off-site that's wholly within the city's approval to just do that. So instead of making that a condition of approval, the city can just take that action. And so it's reflected in the staff report as being done because of this, it's needed by this development, but it's not actually a condition of approval that has to be checked off at final site plan because the city can do that on its own process that's provided under the municipal code.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Christina. The last part I wanted to cover in the staff report was actually inadvertently, we had deleted several criteria items and findings in the first staff report on July 20th. So I just wanted to highlight those. They all met all the criteria, but I wanted to make sure it's in the staff report. So this would include discretionary use criteria C and D. And then we also have site plan criteria A and B. And these were all included in the staff report for today, Springfield Oregon Speaks. And apologies for that. Not sure how that disappeared. All right. You all have access to that. So let me just go back to the presentation. Here we go. So the public comments were addressed in findings 15 through 16. Again, screening from residential properties to the north. And then findings 18 to 21, vehicular parking and circulation. And then, as Christina explained, the finding number 21, that the city would put up no parking signs at the end of Otto Street. Again, the new condition of approval, number 2, addresses the vegetative screening. And findings 26 and 27 address the discretionary use criteria C and D. And then findings 28 through 31 covers site plan criteria A and B. So I just wanted to highlight where we are requiring vegetative screening. So as you can see, there's residential properties to the north of the eastern parcel. So this has been addressed now with condition of approval number 2. And then concerns around parking and circulation are addressed by finding number 21, where the city will put up no parking signs. And this is just a Google Street View of the end of Otto Street and how it is pretty congested as is, and very hard for turnarounds, especially for emergency vehicles. This proposal meets the discretionary use criteria listed in the Development Code 5.9-120. Findings 1 through 7 address the provisions of the Metro Plan, specifically policies H2 and H5. Findings 8 through 12 address the applicable specific development standards. This proposal also meets the other discretionary use criteria regarding the following. Site conditions are found in findings 13 to 22. Mitigating adverse effects is included in finding number 26, but also included in the site plan criteria and findings. Additional discretionary use criteria is covered in finding number 27, which basically says it does not apply to this application. And then the discretionary use has 2 conditions of approval, number 1 and number 2. Moving on to the site plan review criteria, this proposal meets the site plan review criteria listed in SDC 5.17-125. Staff held a development review committee meeting, and findings 28 through 93 of the staff report incorporate the committee's comments and address the criteria of approval. To be a fully compliant site plan, we include conditions of approval number 3 through 8, which all must be met prior to final site plan approval. Again, here's the site plan, sorry guys, of Pierce Park. And because Willamette Lane has met all the required criteria for Pierce Park with the listed conditions of approval, staff recommends the commission approve both the site plan and discretionary use applications. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you, commissioners. Both myself and the applicant, represented by Simon Dawes, are here for any additional comments and follow-up questions you may have.
Thank you, Melissa. I will now hand it over to the applicant for a rebuttal, which can include a presentation of any new evidence or testimony. Simon, did you have anything to add?
I don't believe Simon is in the audience tonight. I did see Eric Adams, who is an employee, if he wants to, I don't know.
My apologies, I didn't realize Simon didn't make it. I did communicate with him earlier today, but Eric Adams is also a staff at Willamette Lane. And if he's able to chime in, please do.
Thank you, Melissa and Planning Commission. Yes, we appreciate the thorough review and revised staff report that's been issued for your consideration this evening, and have reviewed and concur with the proposed conditions of approval and have no additional testimony or evidence to present at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I will now move on to opportunity for testimony. Melissa, would you mind closing out of your screen? Oh, great. Sandy took over and here's the agenda. So I will call participants in order of their position to testify. So first, I will call participants who are in favor of these land use applications tonight. Brenda, is there anyone who has indicated they would like to speak in favor? Just checking to make sure you all can hear me.
We can.
Okay. Just checking back in with Brenda to see if we have any folks who would like to provide testimony in favor of the applications.
So I have one person who's identified themselves in the chat. That's Terrence Bohm. He did not indicate if he is in favor or against. And I also have Dennis Diane, who is attending the meeting but has not entered anything in the. Okay, Bohm's chatted that he's neutral.
Okay, thank you, Brenda. For those listening, if you would like to provide public comment or testimony for these applications tonight, please put your name and your mailing address and whether you are in favor, neither in favor nor opposed, or opposed to the application in the chat. And you will address that message to the host. And this is your opportunity. And then I will call in order. So I'll just give a moment for that.
Chair, I think if you don't get information from someone who wants to speak about whether they're in favor or opposed, you can treat them as neutral and call them that way.
Thank you for that point of order. Okay, so having none who would like to provide testimony in favor, we will then move on to testimony neither in favor nor opposed. So we will move on to Terrence Bohm. Terrence, you may now unmute and you'll have about 3 minutes to share your testimony.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you.
Yeah. I had a couple questions. One was on this screen. It sounds like it's not required, but is Willamette Lane agreeing to do some screening for the properties along the north of the parcel to the east? And then what are the city setbacks for any development, whether it's a walking trail or any structures in that parcel also?
Thank you for that testimony. We will address your comments after the testimony is finished. All right, and then now it's time for testimony opposed to the application. Is there anybody in the chat, Brenda?
Nope, no one else.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so now I will hand it back over to Melissa Carino to provide staff response to the testimony.
Thank you, Chair McGinley. So as you heard from Eric Adams, who's the representative of Willamette Lane, that he did agree to, or that Willamette Lane agrees to all the new findings and conditions of approval in the staff report that I showed. And condition number 2 deals with the screening to the residential properties to the north. Regarding setbacks, I believe it is 20 to 25 feet away from residential property lines. But I don't know for sure for gravel paths, so forgive me for not having that answer right away, but when I did review this, along with the Development Review Committee, all setback requirements were met.
Thank you, Melissa. And now back over to the applicant for rebuttal.
Thank you, Planning Commission Chair. No rebuttal other than to confirm for the purpose of the testimony that was provided that Willamette Lane does concur and agree to the conditions of approval that have been recommended as part of this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, now is the time for the commission to ask possible questions to the applicant, staff, or persons who have testified. And let's see, you can just raise your hands. So this is our time to discuss and deliberate and ask questions. Or sorry, not deliberate. This is our time to ask questions to the applicant and staff. So please raise your hand or turn your video on if you would like to ask a question. I have Commissioner Salazar.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a quick question. I'm curious, this is a question for the applicant or staff. I'm just curious if street parking is allowed on that parcel of 31st Street that is close to that near tip of the triangle of that eastern portion. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Salazar. I actually believe my colleague, Michael Liebler, our transportation engineer, is on this call, so I would let him respond about 31st Street. But one thing I did want to add, and I included in the staff report, the Marcola Meadows subdivision to the south of the proposed park will have on-street parking, at least on one side of the street. So I just wanted to cover that. Michael, are you there by any chance?
I am there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. 31st Street is I believe a major collector or a collector road, and it has bike lanes and no parking all the way up to the path. But it has not been improved from the path at 31st to the north. And I do not see on Google Street View that we have posted any no parking along there as of now. So I would say that there is some kind of shoulder parking and no real parking restriction north of the path in the undeveloped portion of the collector, but definitely not south of the path where there are bike lanes.
Thank you, Michael and Melissa.
Are there any other questions to staff, to the applicant, to the folks who provided testimony? Okay. Would the commission like to close the public hearing and or the public record, or continue the hearing and hold the record open to another date? And so that would be followed by a motion if you would like. Okay, I'll move. Oh wait, go ahead, Commissioner Gill.
I move to close the public hearing and the public record.
I second. So motion to close the public hearing and the public record, moved by Commissioner Gill, seconded by Commissioner McGinley. Brenda, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Commissioner McGinley.
Aye.
Commissioner, I'm sorry, fighting with the court here. Commissioner Landon.
Aye.
Commissioner Gill.
Aye.
Commissioner Cordula.
Yes.
Commissioner Bergen is absent. Commissioner Salazar.
Aye.
Commissioner Buck.
Aye.
We have a 6-0 with 1 absent.
Motion carries. Okay. Now, the next item now that the public hearing and the public record are closed, is to discuss the application. So this is an opportunity to discuss, to deliberate. But if you are also ready to make a motion, I am also willing to hear that. I will just begin by throwing myself in the queue. I appreciate the thorough staff report and the additions that addressed concerns last time, specifically finding 21, 15, 16, and 81. So thank you, staff, for that. That remedied my concerns, and I will hand it over to Commissioner Puebla.
Yes, I'd like to commend both staff and Willamette Lane, both for the thorough reports, and also Willamette Lane, especially for their citizen engagement. I found it really robust, and really welcome to see that for getting people the parks that they want. Thank you.
Commissioner Gill.
I would like to echo both of those comments about staff and Willamette Lane, and Willamette Lane's working with staff in response to the public engagement with us and this process with the Planning Commission. And I really want to thank the community for participating in that process. From my perspective, the findings and the conditions of approval have addressed those issues well.
Are there any other commissioners who would like to provide discussion? Commissioner Salazar.
Thank you. Yeah, I echo my colleagues on the commission. I think the staff and Willamette Lane have done a great job. Staff and the applicant have done a great job working together to make sure that the community concerns are addressed. I do have a concern still that the unique feature of this park will bring more traffic than a typical neighborhood park, and I think staff and the applicant have done what they can to address that. But I do have a slight concern about the number of trips that may be generated to the specific park. But I also think that the parking is that's available is adequate in the Marcola Meadow subdivision and along 31st.
Thank you, Commissioner Salazar. Commissioner Gill.
So I'd like to make a motion. I move to adopt the order approving the Pierce Park site plan review and discretionary use applications as presented this evening, which is different than what was in the packet. So I just wanted to highlight as presented this evening for this item.
Second, motion to adopt the order approving the Pierce Park site plan review and discretionary use applications that were presented this evening, moved by Commissioner Gill, seconded by Commissioner McGinley. Brenda, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Commissioner McGinley.
Aye.
Commissioner Landon.
Aye.
Commissioner Gill.
Aye.
Commissioner Coagula.
Yes.
Commissioner Bergen is absent. Commissioner Salazar.
Aye.
Commissioner Buck.
Aye.
Chair, you have 6-0, 1 absent vote.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, staff. Thank you to the applicant. I'm looking forward to seeing this come to fruition, if not appealed to the City Council. See a new attraction come to our neighborhoods, especially for children. The next item on our agenda usually would be a report of City Council action. However, they are on their break right now. So I'm going to move on to any business from members of the Planning Commission. And I have one piece there. I gave all members of the commission a phone call this afternoon, just letting them know that Mayor Van Gordon called me and said that he would like to put a pause on the return to in-person meetings. We were supposed to have our August 17th meeting in person. That is no longer happening. This pause will go until October 1st, until the point where it will be reevaluated. And I'm always happy to talk to anybody about scheduling concerns and their comfort with that, as long as we're not talking about anything land use related. So just letting you know of that. Do we have any other business from members of the Planning Commission? Okay, I have one more. I just wanted to highlight something related to the work of the City of Springfield and the Planning Commission. KLCC had an interview with Sandy Belson on housing in Springfield. It's available as an audio recording on KLCC, and just want to commend staff for the excellent job there. And it was a really great synopsis of the work that we've been doing with the Development Code Update Project and prior work with ADUs. So kudos to Sandy there. And seeing no other hands, we'll move on to business from Development and Public Works Department.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Sandy Belson. I'm the interim planning manager, and thank you, Chair McGinley, for the kudos offered for the interview on KLCC. So I wanted to share two things. I know that at least some of you had received a bogus email that seemed to come from Sophie McGinley, but it really wasn't her. So just, this is a reminder to always be diligent. When you are getting emails, don't click on links, the general protocols, check to see the email address if it seems at all suspicious. You are using city emails and city property to do that. So just, we're attacked every day. From our IT department says there are attacks on us every day. So our security depends on everybody being diligent. So that's just a good reminder. Secondly, in response to Commissioner Bergen's request for incorporating the council calendar for attendance of the Planning Commission onto Springfield Oregon Speaks, we did meet with People Speak this morning. They have created a page. We need to put the information there and make it accessible to you, but that is it's on the cusp. And there's a way that we can add other information. So Brenda and I will be working with you if there are things that you want easy access to through Springfield Oregon Speaks rather than going to the city website. Please let us know, and we can work on seeing if we can make that available to you. So by the next meeting, we should have all of that up and going. Do any of my colleagues have anything else you want to bring up under business from the department? All right, I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. With that, I adjourn the Planning Commission meeting. And I open the session for the Committee for Citizen Involvement. We have a packed agenda tonight. Our attendance has not changed, so I will forego the roll call. And we will begin with business from the audience. Brenda, do you have any business from the audience in the chat?
No, no one else has requested to speak.
Okay, thank you, Brenda. So on the CCI's agenda tonight is the floodplain district update, citizen involvement strategy, and I will hand it over to Sandy Belson and Katie Carroll.
Thank you so much. I would like to introduce Katie Carroll. She has been doing an awesome job as a graduate student working with the city this summer. And with Jim Donovan's retirement, he was our floodplain manager. And so one of the tasks that falls to that position is to keep our development code in compliance with federal changes, because we are participating in that program. And so Katie has taken on that project this summer and has been doing an impressive job. And so she's before you tonight to present. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sandy. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Katie Carroll, and as Sandy said, I'm a graduate student from Portland State University, and I'm an Oregon Summer Fellow working with the city's Development and Public Works Department this summer on a couple of different projects. I'm here tonight to talk to you about one of those, which is the update of Springfield's floodplain ordinance, or that's section 3.3-400 of the Springfield Development Code, which is the floodplain overlay district. A bit of background on the project. So FEMA runs a program called the National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP, that Springfield participates in. And participation in the program allows the community, allows members of the community access to flood insurance at reduced rates and helps protect development within the floodplain from damage in the event of a flood. And to be able to participate in the NFIP, communities have to adopt and enforce an ordinance that regulates development within their floodplain, which is what section 3.3-400 does. And another part of participating in the NFIP program involves periodic visits called community assistance visits, or CAVs, to the community to ensure that their floodplain management program is in compliance with FEMA's requirements. In Oregon, DLCD has been designated as the state level administrator of the NFIP program. And so they conduct these CAV visits on behalf of FEMA. And a DLCD initiated CAV visit to Springfield resulted in the need to update the city's floodplain development ordinance to ensure that it's compliant with FEMA's current requirements as well as state requirements. And DLCD has a model code that's been approved by FEMA Region 10 to accomplish this that communities must adopt. And within the model code, there's not a lot of flexibility in terms of changes that communities can make, other than there are some opportunities to adopt higher standards or add clarifying language. And consistent with the City of Springfield's past practice, staff is working on updating that floodplain ordinance to comply with FEMA's minimum standards, or where the city already had a higher standard in place, we're remaining consistent with that. And so for the citizen involvement strategy for this project, the approach staff has planned follows the requirements of a legislative decision to amend the code. And so that will involve 2 public hearings, one before yourselves as the Planning Commission on September 8th, and then a second public hearing that will be a joint public hearing with the Springfield City Council and the Lane County Board of Commissioners on December 13th. And for both of these public hearings, the city will mail notice to impacted property owners. So that's people that own property within the floodplain. And the city will also publish notice on its website and in the newspaper to inform the public of these changes. So tonight we're asking you to approve this as the citizen involvement strategy for the project to update the floodplain district. And I'd be happy to answer any questions now. Thank you for your time. And if Sandy, if you had anything to add too.
Thank you, Katie. I'll just ask that the commissioners turn their video on so that Katie can see the commission, since she's a visiting fellow and this is her first planning commission. With that,
Chairman Ginley, I'm not able to because my video has been turned off by the host.
Oh, let me try something.
There we go.
Okay. Commissioner Quivla, you have a question?
No, I'd like to make some additions perhaps to the outreach. First of all, newspapers, I would recommend that we have both Register Guard and the Eugene Weekly postings. I was also thinking that we should have outreach to NGOs, including the Springfield Board of Realtors, the Home Builders Association, and then environmental NGOs like Audubon, Mackenzie River Trust, Sierra Club, Audubon, Willamette River Keepers, and Environment Oregon. And then I was also wondering if it might be wise to have postings to riverfront wetland and public access areas to wetlands. So some additions.
Commissioner Cuevalo, you had Board of Realtors, and then who else did you list initially? You're still
Unmute myself. Okay. Springfield Board of Realtors, the Home Builders Association, and then environmental NGOs. You know, just a list of the whole group.
So I
Do you
think
want me
we,
to say them through again, or would
no,
that be helpful?
I had missed the home builders. That was the part I hadn't caught.
Yeah, I think they'd probably like to be informed. Thanks.
Sure. So I think many of those are on our interested parties lists for other projects. And so I think we can certainly include a notice to the Springfield Board of Realtors and the home builders for the environmental groups. I'm happy to say that in a general category rather than being specific at this point. I think that that would cover what you were requesting. And then the Eugene Weekly. I mean, I guess I'm curious, you know, those legal ads are pretty expensive, and we do provide media notice. So would a media notice to the Eugene Weekly be sufficient? I'm not even sure Eugene Weekly does the legal notice.
Oh, I think they actually do, but no, I was actually speaking of a PSA.
Okay.
Not the legal notice.
Okay. So just to clarify, so we can send like a media notice to the local press, which would include Register Guard, the Eugene Weekly. If we're going to include them, I would tend to go for the Chronicle as well, because they cover a lot of the Springfield news. So as long as we're talking a media release and not something that's going to cost to publish, like we have to, we are obligated to publish a legal notice in the Register Guard. So that's the minimum, but we can certainly do the media notice without incurring additional costs to the city. And then it's up to them what they publish.
Commissioner Buck, did you want to be put in the queue? I saw your hand come and go.
Yes, I was just going to comment if a PSA would be appropriate, and then I heard Sandy mention that, because typically those don't cost,
right?
But they're pretty effective. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Gill.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that presentation. Wow, very succinct and clear. So well done there. And thank you for your work on this. I am curious if, and I know it's added work, but if there's a easy way to, and maybe it's in that media notice of making it a little more robust and using it as an opportunity to encourage the public to think about disaster preparedness and disaster planning and talk about how the city is doing this so that they have access to the FEMA insurance. I mean, I know it's required, but it's also a big deal that we're doing it so that this is available to the public. And maybe through, the county emergency management groups or the other organizations who are working around that, it could be a way to pitch at the same time, like, here's the work that we're doing, here's the notice, here are the changes. And also, like, be aware, flooding is a disaster and you could be preparing. I don't know if there's a way to sort of combine those things, because it's so important. And this community was so impacted and everybody's on nerves edge right now with wildfire stuff again. I just feel like it might be a good opportunity to sort of embrace some of the bigger picture needs of the city with that at the same time as getting this message out. And maybe it is just a more robust PSA that incorporates that, which would make it a more compelling article to get in the paper.
So I think we could coordinate with Ken Vogany, who is our emergency manager. In my mind, I'm thinking November is Emergency Preparedness Month. Tom Boyette, who's on the call, he's a city staff, you might remember if that is the correct month. But if it is, that would be a prime opportunity to coordinate some messaging as we're preparing for the council public hearing. So I think in terms of the strategy, we can make it a little bit more general in terms of, coordinate with emergency preparedness messaging as appropriate, and leave it at that. If that's so, it looks like that's satisfactory to you. And we can, but Ken is always happy to get more messaging out and is looking for ways to do that. So, and Katie's already been working with Ken on some of the actual code amendments. So, we'll be in sync with that going forward.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Commissioner Gill. Sandy, I saw in the packet that there will be an opportunity for broader public engagement with the process to adopt a new floodplain map. Can you expand a bit on that and when we expect that to happen and what kind of outreach process you're anticipating?
So it keeps getting delayed. So one of the reasons we hadn't updated the code, even though our community assistance visit that Katie mentioned earlier started several years ago, we were delaying to wait for the maps to do it all together, but then the maps keep getting delayed. And so I don't have a confident timeline for that, but basically as I understand it, and I'm not well versed in this, I'm taking the plunge. This is a new area for me for Springfield since Jim retired. So there is a process to update the McKinsey floodplain maps and possibly also the Willamette, although I'm not as sure about that. And so that will be potentially adding people to the floodplain or removing people from the floodplain. And so that's going to have a lot more significance to people. I mean, the changes we're doing now are more just kind of minor changes to how you meet floodplain requirements. But actually adding people to the floodplain will be a bigger deal. And so that's where I think there will be more robust community engagement to talk about that. And as part of that broader conversation, if there's interest, then we can talk about, do we want to have higher standards than what we have currently? And I don't have any more detail about how we would do that or when, or it's not, we're kind of just waiting.
Thank you, Sandy. Yes, COVID has definitely complicated the FEMA process and timeline. And it sounds like there will be an opportunity for broader public engagement regarding floodplain, and we'll be able to point more folks to materials developed during this process so they know about the NFIP. Commissioner Buck.
Just a quick comment. In respect to floodplains, I would encourage broader discussion and awareness of what the impact to individual homeowners may be as the floodplain changes. There are going to be impacts with not only insurance impacts, but also I imagine that's going to impact how lenders view things as well. As you guys all know, professionally, this is an area that I have some outside knowledge in. So that's going to be a discussion in which I think it's going to be helpful for people to understand exactly how that's going to play out and what it may mean for them in regards to how that looks.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Is there any continued discussion, or is there maybe a motion? Commissioner Gill.
I move to approve the citizen involvement strategy that was in the agenda packet with the additions of outreach suggested tonight, summarized by Sandy as they were proposed.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I just want to state them again. So outreach to the Board of Realtors, home builders, environmental NGOs, and to provide a media notice to local news organizations and to coordinate with emergency management and messaging.
I'll second.
Yes.
Okay. Motion to approve the citizen involvement strategy with the changes just summarized by Sandy, moved by Commissioner Gill, seconded by Commissioner Salazar. Brenda, can we have a roll call vote, please?
When I go to say something, anyway, the pointer moves around everywhere. So Commissioner McGinley.
Aye.
Commissioner Landon.
Aye.
Commissioner Gill.
Aye.
Commissioner Koivula.
Yes.
Commissioner Bergen's absent. Commissioner Salazar.
Aye.
And Commissioner Buck.
Aye.
We have a 6-0 with 1 absent vote.
Thank you, Brenda. Motion carries. And with that, I just wanted to commend Katie for her work. I'm glad you're on this summer as a fellow because we have our citizen involvement hat on right now. It's really always great to see the city of Springfield getting young people and young professionals involved in local government work. So just appreciative of that. And I hope you enjoy your summer and are able to visit Springfield one day. It's a beautiful city. And I adjourn the CCI meeting. Our next meeting will be August 17th, and I'll see you all there. Thank you, everybody.
And remember, it will be a virtual meeting.
Yes, thank you. It will be a virtual meeting.
Yeah, and well, we also plan to start it at 6 o'clock because it's going to be a longer meeting. So starting at 6 instead of 5:30.
That's correct.
Thank you for the heads up.
Yes.
Can I ask Sandy, how late do you anticipate it going on the 17th?
I don't know. Christina, do you have an idea about that?
I don't have a good idea. It will depend on, it's not a public hearing, but it will depend on whether any public comment is received. That notice went out, I believe last week, and I'm not sure, Andy Limbert is the planner on that. I'm not sure if anything's been received. It's a meeting to adopt essentially a decision on remand. And so there might be just more discussion about the findings on that one and that kind of a thing.
And
So
Commissioner
I
Buck,
would
if you
anticipate robust discussion rather than like a long hearing, because there's no, unless the commission decides to open a hearing and then you would just kick it to another meeting.
Commissioner Buck, if you have a conflict, you can always contact staff for an excused absence or just come to the work session beforehand, just for that process.
Andy did request just 45 minutes for that meeting. Andy Limbert.
Sorry, what was that, Brenda?
Andy Limbert is a staff person on that, and he requested 45 minutes for that staff report.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair. It's just helpful to, let my family know what to expect.
Welcome to some late nights talking about land use.
Yes. Well, I always get my wife's been asking the question, when's your meeting over? And I'm being told that I don't know is not a great answer. Although it's the accurate one. Thank you.
Well, I hope that 8:07 is okay for today because now the meeting is officially over. So I will see you all at 6 o'clock virtually on August 17th. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
I always say
Thanks,
it's
y'all.
going to be a late one, and then if it's a surprise, then they're happier.
Thanks for the advice.